It's time for this week's Mac and Griffin Civil Discourse for Patriots United for America. Topics this week: Biden picks a VP. Is NATO necessary? Are Russians real? And a plethora of other political goodies for you.
Mac here and Big Griffin, and Griffin moved his stuff to an apartment, and we're gonna hear from him how excited he is to go to University of Georgia. So you're going to in-person classes next week?
Next week, yes, sir. We're moving out to in-person classes. It's kind of a hybrid system that we've got going on. We have some classes online mostly. All classes are online mostly, right? And then we're separated in different cohorts in which, some people go to class certain days, some go to other days. It's kind of designed to minimize the amount of people on campus and make sure every room is equipped for social distancing. And really, with all the mandatory masks and everything that we've been doing, I really think that this is the best way to do it if we have to do in-person class.
So
And-
everybody in the class will have a mask on?
Correct. Teacher.
Oh, well, that's pretty
everyone.
cool. That's a good
So
idea.
mandatory masks, hand sanitizer everywhere. They gave us 2 masks actually, if you didn't have your own for some reason, during the global
Excellent.
pandemic. So I mean, while I question the responsibility of heading back to school, I understand the way they're doing it, and I think they're doing it in the best way possible, because if you cancel a university, think about what that does to university town, a town like Athens or a town like Auburn, Alabama, how that would be so crippling to the economy. Now, obviously, lives for economy, I believe that. I think we've made a decision in this country to have a debate on that. So it's rather interesting. I don't know what I support personally. I'm just going to go with the UGA presidents and UGA administration's guidelines and do the best that I can.
And see how long it lasts.
And I give it a month. I made a bet with my friends that we're going to be out in a month. I mean, there's 33,000 students at UGA, if I'm not mistaken, at the 2 campuses. Vast majority of whom are in Athens, and I just
That
don't
sounds
see
like
how
more than 10. It sounds like
Yeah.
a lot more than 10.
It's a social gathering of a lot more than 10. And
Yeah,
then you
that's what it
start talking
sounds like.
about dormitories and the dining halls, and it just becomes, And then again,
Fantastic. If
how
you're a virus.
how responsible are college kids? How responsible are we? I don't know.
We're gonna see. We're gonna see. I think it might not be as bad for you guys because you guys are a pretty healthy group, and but anybody that's got small kids, you see people sniffling, and even my dad was saying when my kids were younger that anytime he saw them, he always ended up with sniffles for a couple of days or whatever. They're just like little carriers of whatever, right? So
Right.
just because the kids are going to be okay at school doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to carry it home to all their diabetic parents or overweight parents or
Right.
underlying condition parents. So
Right.
it's not so much about the kids; it's about them being carriers and giving it to everybody else. So it'll be.
Yeah.
So far in Georgia, we're providing a lot of data for the rest of the country as far
Yeah.
as what not to do and how not to do it. And we'll just see where that goes. So it's a political show. So let's not just talk about pandemics. We're talking about unifying the center, right? Patriots United for America. So it's our first episode, and I'm Mac. I'm the old man, and we got Griffin, the young man, and then we also have 2 lovely ladies that are our partners or that are going to launch their own episode, and we'll let them do their intros and all that stuff. But interesting news came out yesterday, and this will kind of date our first episode, but Biden chose Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And it wasn't my first choice, but as Bill Maher said, eat the chicken. And he actually put an F word in there, eat the effing chicken. And I'm on board now with eating the chicken. I would have still voted that way, even if it was Captain Kangaroo or something. So I feel pretty good about it.
Well,
What would you have to say about it, young man? Because people have been saying a lot of mean things already. So where are we at on this?
well, my favorite politician in the United States, Tulsi Gabbard, delivered an excellent refutation of Kamala Harris's rather frankly atrocious record on criminal justice. And I think that clip should just be played over and over and over again, just to kind of really show you what kind of person that she is. It was the most predictable choice, frankly, when Biden said it'll be a minority woman. That was obviously the first person I thought of, but it was the first person I thought of mostly because she dropped out in the primary rather early for a pretty big candidate. I mean, Pete Buttigieg held on for quite some time. Bernie Sanders obviously held on until he was the second to last one to leave. And frankly, I think there's some collusion between Biden and Kamala. I think Kamala dropped out to benefit Biden or to benefit the anti-Sanders, anti-progressive forces. And you know, fair play. Absolutely fair play. And she got what she wanted, I guess.
So we've been on the air, I guess, a couple of minutes. We've been taping a couple of minutes. We already disagree.
Yeah.
So she wasn't my first choice,
Mhm.
but at the same time, like I said, I'm going to eat the chicken. I'm in. I will. I would have voted for Captain Kangaroo if he had picked Captain Kangaroo. I was actually pulling for Tammy Duckworth.
Okay.
I thought she would be the perfect counterbalance to two old white gropers that neither one of them had ever served. So I was
Right.
actually kind of pulling for her. But if it's not going to be her, you know, you got to look, and as with a lot of things nowadays, California is a pretty liberal state, and you know, the progressives and the liberals in California seem to really like her record, and they seem to like her. They did elect her. They seemed happy with her when she was in San Francisco, and then they seemed happy with her when she was the AG for the state. So you know, one of the things that I was critical on about it was, you know, people are marching in the streets for justice against police and Black Lives Matter and just all these movements, and you're going to get a prosecutor. To me, that seemed kind of interesting.
Bold?
Yeah, maybe not bold. I just thought, you know, well, and there were two prosecutors, right, that you had to choose from in the group. So, but you know, when you really do start peeling away the Russian onion, because they've uncovered a lot of strange propaganda that's being generated by certain groups. Because I myself had thought she had been really easy on police and done a lot of interesting things, and that's something that bots and a lot of people propagated during the primary campaign. So, you know, I don't really know her record. I haven't dug in enough to know yet. Maybe next week's episode we'll be able to debate it more. But I was pulling for something else, but now that it's her, I am 100% on board, and let's go and let's get this country back and start marching.
How much do, I don't know, the audience or you, how much do you believe in the Russia thing? Because I don't.
At all?
At all. No, I don't think
That's
so.
insane. Well, there's definitely I mean, it's so easy now too, and
Right.
to say that we're not doing it in
Correct.
other countries, and
We are.
and absolutely right. I mean, we're the biggest hypocrites on the planet when it comes to this stuff. We're lucky that nobody else has the drone attacks that we have, and that we don't have drones attacking us all over. But I'm a pretty big believer on it. I think they know how many Facebook accounts that they've had, and I think they've done a lot of crackdowns on Twitter accounts and bot accounts all over the place. And it's not just the Russians; it's the Chinese too. And to think that they're not trying to spread disinformation, and to think that they're not trying to instigate groups against each other, I think is kind of naive, because it's good policy. It's good to stoke the fires in America and to stoke the fires in the West and to have unrest. So it's not that I've seen any hardcore proof of it, but I just think it would be really easy to do. And I think it's a pool game that it would behoove them to play, I would think.
That I understand, and I'm glad you don't deny the fact that the United States does massive interference campaigns in countries like Ukraine and Belarus currently,
Oh, absolutely.
and so on and so on and so on. But back to the more salient point, um, the Russian Federation and the Chinese especially have not gained much from a Trump presidency. If anything, the Trump administration's withdrawal from the JCPOA and Trump's administration's rather, I mean, they just haven't gained much. And to say Trump is a Russian puppet is categorically false. It's just simply not the case because he hasn't done things that have been really pro-Russian. He hasn't lifted the sanctions on Russia that have been in place since 2014. If he were an FSB or GRU puppet, which are the Russian intelligence agencies, then he would immediately have done that. You know, and frankly, the one shining grace to me of the Trump presidency has been a less interventionist foreign policy. It's the fact that, we did not get involved in Syria and destabilize the situation further, that we left, that we're slowly withdrawing from Afghanistan after 20 years. I frankly, I think those are good things because those conflicts are no longer in the interests of the security of the United States. And there's no humanitarian justification for being in there because no conflict has a humanitarian justification. It's all about political interest. And Obama talked a big talk about fighting dictators, but he was chummy with the Saudis his entire presidency. So either, we have a foreign policy that's realistic, where we accept that not every government that is around the world would have our values, or we have one where we pick and choose the good dictators and the bad dictators. And so I think Trump's foreign policy towards Russia and China, it's been rather hostile towards China. And sure, would Russia and China benefit from disinformation campaigns? Possibly. But that's just another part of this digital Cold War that we're entering ourselves into by being so antagonistic towards other countries. In my opinion, that's kind of the beginning symptom. It's only going to escalate.
I think, if you flip that around a little bit and you say, our relationship with Germany, our relationship with France, our relationship with the EU in general, and the NATO alliance. You look at NATO, and Trump's been beating the hell out of that since day one. That people don't pay their fair share, and they're. So if you look at it GDP. Like, right. But if you look at that, and that's got to make Vladdy happy when he's sitting around and they're toasting each other with some good vodka that the rest of the crowd's not drinking. The top shelf stuff. I would think that would make him happy. I would think all of the monkey wrenches that he's throwing into agreements with everybody in the West would make him happy. I would think, there's a lot of things that would make him happy. Helsinki, just that whole speech and that whole debacle, and just the dysfunction that he's brought in general. And then again, if you say unrest in the U.S. is good for Russia, there's a lot of unrest in the U.S. There's a tremendous amount, and it's almost like a powder keg, right? And you can just stoke it. It makes it easy to stoke it. A couple messages here, a couple messages there. I mean, they know some of the messaging campaigns that happened in 2016, and when you say that Trump won by 76,000 critical votes in 3 states. All kind of things mattered. Mostly the hatred for Hillary and the Clintons, not so much Hillary, but just Clinton, the name in general in those 3 states, because of NAFTA and basically their view that they got screwed over through the first Clinton debacle. Those 3 states were very hard on anybody with a Clinton name, right? So I think that you can't blame it on the Russians, right? I think that was kind of the primary thing, because if you look at the 76,000 votes that he won by, that almost all of that you could say was anti-Clinton, not pro-Trump, right?
Also low turnout, frankly. Low turnout among Democratic voters in the 2016 election because they weren't enthused by Hillary Clinton's candidacy.
Well, those 3 states, right? Definitely
exactly.
In those 3 states. Record low turnout in those states because they're like, Jesus. I mean, and I tell you, I felt dirty when I came out of that booth. I was like, ooh, that was nasty. But at the same time, I was eating the chicken. There was only chicken. I would have eaten the beef if there was beef, but there was no beef, and I'm like stealing Bill Maher's thunder here, but that's one of the only things that I really agree with him on, and that was a pretty good one. But you touch on a really good point. Let me take this point, the point that and it could be his incompetence, it could be whatever, but the body count of Donald Trump, and let's just say outside the United States, but the civilian body count of Donald Trump is probably lower than any president, and I'm 52 years old, than any president since I've been alive. Mm-hmm. So, and that's one of the most important things to me, is, how many people that are sitting around for dinner or for breakfast or whatever, have a missile that comes in and kills them and then creates 20 terrorists because they just got vaporized and they had nothing to do with anything, right? It's a terrorist making machine. And that's one of the things, whether it's his incompetence, whether it's his policy, whether it's whatever, but his body count, I would think drone wise is lower than Obama, war wise is lower than Bush. Just black ops and torture wise, probably lower than Bush. I mean, it's man, not that I think he would take the high moral ground on that, but that's one of the things that you can say about him, and his incompetence in his corruption. If you assume that every administration has been corrupt to some extent in our lifetime, part of this collusion between a two-party system where they're going to collude to help each other and get nothing done and screw over the people potentially. He's falling kind of in that vein or whatever, but I didn't mean to cut you off. So what do you got?
So if we're going back to Donald Trump's foreign policy, he's the first president in 30 years not to start a war. So that in itself is remarkable, because everyone passed. Obama obviously had Libya and Syria. Bush Jr. had Iraq and Afghanistan. Clinton with Yugoslavia and the bombing of Serbia 3 times. Reagan with the invasion of Grenada. H.W. Bush with the invasion of Panama. I think Panama was under George H.W. Bush, and then so on and so on. So perfect in 30 years since Jimmy Carter, the renowned peace warrior Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, but even he had some lunatics in the background that now that the visibility, the 2020 vision of looking backwards, even he had some lunatics that were running around in the shadows that were doing all kind of nasty stuff.
That was the Cold War.
Yeah. That I never knew about until recently, because he seemed like he was just such a great Georgia farmer, sweet peace guy or whatever. But
and back to your point about the American alliance, the Atlantic alliance between the United States and Europe, that's been eroding anyway, frankly. We go back to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Both Gerhard Schröder and Jacques Chirac, leaders of France and Germany at the time, openly opposed the invasion. They've openly opposed American foreign policy over many issues. The Germans condemned the bombing of Syria in many of their statements on the issue. So I think that Europe and the United States are going different ways. While they're certainly both democratic and will stay that way, they're not anti-liberal or illiberal powers, meaning democratic. The U.S. and the Europeans or the EU as an institution really, are beginning to have very different interests. And I really think NATO is becoming more and more meaningless. As we can see with the clashes between Turkey and Greece over Cyprus, and also with the clashes in the Mediterranean very recently, it's rather meaningless. And I don't think Russia is the threat people think it was. People think of Russia as the Soviet Union, as this great empire that's going to swallow Europe if the Americans aren't there to defend it. France has nuclear weapons. The German military is quite powerful. The French military is quite powerful. The Russians have no real reason strategically to invade Germany, Poland, all the countries in the European Union, maybe the Baltics. But even then, was it worth it? Is the risk? I mean, Putin, if anything, is a calculator. He's very good at making foreign policy decisions. And because of his structure around him, they're rather conservative decisions. Russia's military interventions have been rather limited. Ukraine, which is kind of questionable, but we'll say they went into Ukraine. They went to Syria, both of which were either former Russian allies or Russian allies. And I think Putin's far less of a threat than people think he is, because we're still in that kind of Cold War mentality. Because we see Putin having his own sphere of influence, his own ideas on how countries should be run, and we think of it as communism 2.0, when really it's just Russia's culturally different history that's going to lead it to a different conclusion. Because frankly, democracy did not work in Russia. Democracy as we know it, liberal democracy, did not work in Russia. Yeltsin led Russia from the 90s into 1989, and it was objectively, by all objective measures, the GDP per capita, the unemployment rate, and the GDP to debt ratio, it was by far the worst time for Russians, even since like post-Stalin. And the collapse of the Soviet Union made Russia want to have a place in the world, because it felt like it was getting surrounded by the West. Because if you look at Russian history, right, they have been invaded by Napoleon, by Barbarossa, way before Napoleon, by Hitler. They've lost millions of people to Western invaders. So they're going to want a buffer zone. They don't want to be bordered by the Germans, by the Americans. And I think, frankly, that's reasonable. And one problem I think we have in this country is that we don't understand why other countries are the way that they are and have the histories and leadership that the way that they do. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. There is a bias for anything that's different, that it's got to be bad and to be feared. And I think that's natural, right? You're going to see that in any countries and things like that.
They don't like us either.
Well, I was about to say, at the same time, I think you might be smoothing over it a little bit. I mean, I don't think it's time to go back to a Cold War. And I would think...
I hope not. I hope we don't have a Cold War.
Well, I mean, the thing that I can imagine, right, like, is the kind of BRIC alliance, right? And it's not the BRAC alliance. There's no America in the BRIC alliance. I can imagine, a lot of people talking about getting off of the dollar, right, and the benefits of getting off the dollar, or everybody wants to get off the dollar until something hits the fan, and then it's like, oh my God, I got to get everything into dollars, right? But I would think that the conversations between Russia and China, even in back rooms, or Russia and some of our Middle East not so great buddies, wouldn't be in our best interest, right? And so even though they're not going to go marching into Germany, probably, but they cause a lot of problems in the Ukraine. They cause a lot of problems in everybody that is on their border. And at the same time, they can cause a lot of pain without going into something or whatever. But I still think, I don't think NATO is a bad idea. I don't think, a lot of the alliances are there. But if you're not careful, you'll end up in with kindling for the starting of a world war, like happened in World War I, where just everything just kind of played itself out from one agreement to the next, and then everybody's fighting everybody.
Right.
But I don't know. I think NATO's a good thing, and I've grown up with it. You're young enough to think maybe it's outdated, but
I do think it's outdated.
I'm nostalgic when it comes to NATO. I like myself some NATO.
And I respect that, and I understand where it comes from, but I just think, frankly, it disables European policymakers a lot, because it means that they can't make deals with Russia without approval of the United States. And fundamentally, I think every country should be independent to make its own foreign policy decisions. And I think
absolutely
NATO
I think that it's kind of Disney-ish, because everybody is kind of tied into a lot of invisible agreements, even more than what's on the surface. But that's a great world to strive for.
Yeah.
In a Thoreau kind of way. Just because it doesn't exist doesn't mean that we shouldn't be going for it and shouldn't be pushing it.
Right. And frankly, I think it's not in the best interest of the United States to continue maintaining relationships that are starting to grow apart. I mean, the European Union's biggest trading partner is China. It's going to be China. They're obviously a massive producer of everything. I mean, they're the world's biggest car producer by far, heavy industry, everything. It just makes sense that Europe and China are going to go closer. We cannot prevent this from happening. And I think institutions like NATO kind of ostracize or prevent people from openly saying these things, rather than being like rather than saying the Germans should just make deals with the Chinese and just be open about their friendship. And then you get to people who complain about the human rights situations in Syria, or sorry, not Syria, Russia and China. And frankly, I don't think that's much of our business. As anti-humanitarian as that is, I think we should look inward rather than outward with our problems.
Well, we've made it really easy to have jokes lately, right?
Right.
When the Chinese are looking at us, criticizing about what they're doing in Hong Kong, and it's easy for them to just look back this way. And like literally, the guy said, "I can't breathe. What are we even talking about?" Right.
Right.
And so we're making it a little easier on that front. But I do think when the carrot that we're wielding is so big that you should try to get all that you can out of it, right? Some of this inching around, and again, it's very, like you said, you got to take care of what's going on at home before you start really calling other people out for it,
right?
Because we've been as imperialist and as dark war as anybody on the planet, right? And not just fighting communism, like just fighting whatever the hell we wanted to in Central America or whatever the hell we want to, really anywhere, right? And we don't like this, cool, then we'll get some organization to fund some other organization and fight this proxy war and whatever. Right. So it is very hypocritical to start running around pointing out human rights things, but one would hope, again, just because it's not right doesn't mean that you can't strive for it to be right. And I always imagine, because our policy is so detrimental to the rest of the world and it sells so many bombs and it kills so many people, I often wonder, like, when you take your oath and you're sworn in, then you're taken to a back room and then you're just shown this PowerPoint presentation that shows the economics of like DynCorp and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and all this stuff, and that it is like somehow the heartbeat of American democracy or something, and that the economy will do really well as long as you're bombing civilians on the other side of the world. I mean, I almost think that presentation almost has to happen, because that's what the policy's been until Donald Trump. That's what the policy's been all the way through. And like I said, I'm not a Trump fan or whatever, but one of the most important things to me is stopping the killing of civilians. And, one thing that, like we said, his body count's lower than anybody's. But I do think if we could not be such bad hypocrites and we could get our act together at home, that it would be a nice thing to be able to use the carrot of our consumption and our dollars to motivate, China to do the right thing with their Muslim population, with Hong Kong, with, Taiwan, right? Like, I don't want to see Taiwan be the next Hong Kong. And Hong Kong was one of the best places on the planet. And I've spent a lot of time there, and I thought it was very vibrant and very independent. And the old world of Hong Kong, post-British, pre-Chinese kind of takeover, I thought was a kind of beautiful thing. And I guess it was always so going to be temporary. But, the Taiwanese don't want to be gobbled up either. So I'm hoping we can slow that down and that doesn't happen. And a lot of the stuff that the Trump administration is doing right now, as far as poking China on it, and sending folks over, and they're having press conferences and talking about how great their response to COVID has been. And to me, that is just, you're poking the cobra. I don't think that's a good thing at this point, especially when we have kind of we don't have a whole lot of, I would say, leadership that's worried about the ethics of it. I think they're more worried about the structure of the trade deal and all that stuff. especially with some of those strange things that Trump said to Chinese leadership about some of the atrocities that they are doing. So it always freaks me out. And like I said, we're as bad as anybody. But if you look at the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans, and how we're constantly trying to carve up the globe, I would hope that at some point we would get some kind of leadership that would really start stopping doing that. Even though, like I said, he's been a step in the right direction in that area. But I don't think you should alienate all your allies and just piss everybody off equally either, or piss off your allies and then cozy up to the dictators of the world. I would hope that wouldn't be the strategy either.
So one of my favorite quotes is from this fine gentleman right here, Mr. Charles de Gaulle. And he once said, France has no allies, only interests. And I believe that applies to every country. There's no such thing as a permanent alliance. There are maybe a few in the world, maybe the US and the UK, US and Israel. But even then, those alliances are built on common interests, right? And Russia's and China's is built on common interest, obviously. One, they both don't want American domination. You know, they're both surrounded by the United States. Everyone just kind of conveniently forgets that. The US has bases in Japan, the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, and probably very quickly on Taiwan. You know, they could have a base in Taiwan quite quickly. So China feels that their sea is surrounded by American presence, and South Korea as well. So it objectively is. The United States has bases in Poland, Germany, Italy, all near the Russian Federation, and Turkey, and the Baltic states. So the Russians also feel surrounded. And I think a lot of what we do is like we said, we don't think about the perspective of other people. We don't think about why the Russians wouldn't want American military bases around them. And we think that they're the aggressors for complaining about these things. But more importantly, I frankly think that the United States often lies about its political opponents to get what it wants. The American government, as it stands right now, unfortunately, we saw this with Iraq. Where were Saddam's weapons of mass destruction? We didn't end up finding them. And who's to say what's going on in China? The Chinese government obviously denies the Xinjiang camps, or they don't deny the camps. They deny that they're extermination camps. They say they're re-education camps, and we cannot fathom as Americans re-education camps. That sounds antithetical to American ideas, but it's not antithetical to the ideas of the PRC, the People's Republic of China. And I just really don't think it's our business. But back to the PowerPoint presentation on the bombing. I thought that was rather funny. I think that it's very simple why we do what we do. Look at who writes the checks for the campaigns. Look at the biggest donors to Hillary Clinton. You'll probably find Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, quite up there. I think a lot of the problems in this country really stem from campaign finance. Because, here's the thing. If I donate, let's say I'm Boeing, and I donate, $4 million through black money groups to a campaign, and I call up wanting a contract, I'm going to get it. That's how it was with the tanker program. Airbus made a better tanker. It had larger capacity and larger range. It's the Airbus A330 MRTT. We bought the Boeing because Boeing donated to the campaigns of the people who made decisions. And also because of nationals. We don't want to buy a European product, even if they're better.
Well, I do think if Hillary had been elected, that we would be deep into war somewhere. I don't know where.
Syria. It would have been Syria.
And probably. Iran. Right. But we would have, God forbid, but we would have been doing something somewhere. And at the same time, we'll do a show on the Middle East and the complexities of it and what we think, and have our nonsensical views spread out everywhere. Mm-hmm. But okay, so I think we're getting ready to wrap it up. How's that for our first episode? You like that?
That was pretty good. I think we did a good job. Wow.
I think so too. So thanks everybody that's listening, and we'll post it up, and we'll see you next week. Okay.